Going within. In the following sections, I will present a set of tools that will help you walk the path of your personal Christhood. For practical reasons, I have to present these tools in a certain order, but that order does not represent a progression or a value judgment. Each tool that I present is as important as any other tool. I want you to use all of them because they truly supplement each other. Developing listening grace. Any positive change in your life must begin with an increased awareness and understanding. If you look at history, you will see that any progress experienced by humankind originated with one individual who raised his or her consciousness and brought forth a higher understanding of a particular aspect of life. In many cases, this higher understanding did not come from the outer analytical mind. It came from what one might call the inner or higher mind, and it came through the process that is commonly known as intuition. Even some of the greatest scientists used intuition to make their most significant discoveries. Certainly, all true spiritual leaders use intuition as the basis for their teachings. To begin the path of personal Christhood, you must make a conscious and determined effort to improve your intuition. It is quite possible that you are already familiar with this intuitive process and that you have developed an ability to attain intuitive insights. After all, only such intuitive insights could have prompted you to read and continue to read this book. The flesh and blood of the death consciousness could not have revealed to you the Christ light that is in this book. If you feel that you might benefit from making a conscious effort to further develop your intuition, I encourage you to use some of the many books that are available. There are numerous self-help books that can help you gain a greater understanding of the intuitive process. Many of these books also contain practical tools for increasing your intuition. I will later present you with one such tool. I need you to understand that the current scientific view of intuition is incomplete. In reality, intuition is truly a lower version of Christ consciousness. I have told you about the relativity of the death consciousness. When you are caught in the death consciousness, you can argue for or against any idea without coming up with a definitive answer as to the validity of that idea. However, through your intuition, you can find a definitive answer. You might not be able to produce a rational argument for why the idea is valid. You simply know it is true. Intuition can be described as the ability to know that an idea is true without necessarily being able to argue why it is true. If you will think about this, you might realize a profound truth. The truth of God is above and beyond the relativity of the death consciousness. Therefore, it is simply not possible to come up with a relative or outer argument, an argument that the human ego can fathom and accept for the truth of God. This explains why so many people have failed to fathom the truth of God. This is especially true of many modern scientists who have allowed themselves to believe that unless you can come up with a factual, rational, logical, or intellectual line of reasoning, then an idea simply cannot be valid. To know the truth of God You must realize that this truth cannot be explained in the relative terms that the death consciousness can understand. The truth of God can be known only by reaching beyond the relativity of the death consciousness. When you do reach beyond that relativity and grasp an idea that comes directly from God, then you will often be unable to provide an outer line of reasoning to support your idea. You simply know what you know, and that knowledge is beyond the relativity of the ego and outer mind. It is a truth that passeth understanding. Sharpen your intuition. It is essential that you make an effort to develop and refine your intuition. However, as you begin to gain more familiarity with the intuitive process, you also need to take that process to a higher level. The true purpose of intuition is to develop attunement with the spiritual world. Through this attunement, you can commune with spiritual beings in the higher world, such as myself. However, you can also commune with a higher part of your own mind, a part that is often referred to in spiritual literature as the higher self. I would like to call this part of your mind the Christ self. I have already told you that you are an individualization of God. In the Bible, the name of God is given as I am that I am. One might say that God, in the ultimate sense, is a pure state of consciousness or awareness, a state of consciousness that simply recognizes that I am. When God created you, this pure state of consciousness was individualized for you. Therefore, God created a spiritual self, which I prefer to call the I Am Presence. It is this spiritual self which gives you the sense that I am, I exist, I am alive, I am conscious. People who have already learned to use their intuition will be able to feel that just as you have an I am presence in the spiritual realm, there is also a part of your lower being that is pure awareness. Many spiritual people have had an experience of such a pure form of awareness where you experience that you are conscious without having any thoughts or feelings. You are an empty space of I amness, without the usual sense of being this or that. This pure awareness, this conscious self or conscious you, is created as an extension of your I am presence. The conscious you has the ability to travel into the various levels of the world of form, and it can even travel into the material universe and take on a human body. I have earlier told you about the symbol of the Tai Chi. Your I am presence is the masculine polarity of the totality of your being, and the conscious you is the feminine polarity of your being. Your I am presence is a very high state of consciousness, and it cannot descend into the world of form. Therefore, when the conscious you does descend, it must maintain a thread of contact from its current level of consciousness back to the I am presence. This thread of contact is made possible through the universal Christ consciousness. However, that universal Christ consciousness is individualized for you as your Christ self. I have told you that the universal Christ consciousness is the open door which no human can shut. It is the light which lights every human that comes into the world. Your personal Christ self is the open door which you cannot shut. Your Christ self is what allows the conscious you to maintain contact to your spiritual self and the spiritual world. Therefore, it is through your Christ self that you can know the truth of God. The process of developing personal Christhood is a process whereby the conscious you gradually puts off the old identity of the human ego and puts on the new identity of the Christ mind. It is a process where the conscious you can develop a new sense of identity as a spiritual or Christic being who is not separated from God or from the spiritual self. My point is that you must not be satisfied by merely developing good intuition. You must go beyond what the world currently recognizes as intuition and strive for the complete union, the communion between the conscious you and your Christ self. It is only through this union, this alchemical marriage between the conscious you and your Christ self, that you can put on the fullness of your personal Christhood. Balance. I'm aware that at this point in your life, the goal of attaining full Christhood might seem a bit far off. In reality, it is not, but I will give you a deeper understanding of how to know truth. You can greatly increase the process of coming to know the truth of God by realizing that the key to knowing truth is to strive for balance. To explain the need for balance, let me remind you once again that to the human ego, everything is relative. The serpents in your midst, those who are seeking to manipulate the people of earth, have used the relativity of the death consciousness to create division and conflict among God's people. The primary tool used by the serpents is a tactic often referred to as divide and conquer. You might recall the statement, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." The true meaning is that a person divided against itself by the relativity of the death consciousness cannot recognize the truth of God, and therefore it cannot achieve Christ consciousness. The tactic that has been used so efficiently by the serpents in this world is to use the relativity of the death consciousness to create two extremes that are, or seem to be, in opposition to each other. The purpose is to make you think that truth must be found in one of these extremes. In reality, both extremes spring from the relativity of the death consciousness, and therefore truth is found in none of them. By looking at history, you will see how this tactic has been used in many ways. For example, there is the conflict between communism and capitalism. Many people allowed themselves to be drawn into this conflict, and they thought the struggle between capitalism and communism was a struggle between good and evil. In reality, the struggle between capitalism and communism is simply a struggle between two kinds of totalitarianism, two forms of centralized control of the economy. In a communist system, the state owns or controls the means of production. In a capitalist system, privately held companies are fighting to attain a monopoly. If you take capitalism to its ultimate extreme, one company would own all means of production. However, this can happen only if that company influences, merges with the government, and thereby the ultimate outcome of a capitalist system is a form of state control that is already present in the communist system. What I am telling you here is that capitalism and communism are simply two different ways of attaining centralized control of the economy. The middle way between these two extremes is a form of economy called free enterprise or the free market economy. Unfortunately, many people believe the lie that free enterprise is the same as capitalism. The very basis of the free enterprise economy in unrestricted competition. In a free enterprise economy, it is not possible to create a monopoly. As long as competition remains free, a company can gain a monopoly only on a temporary basis. It is inevitable that some other company will start producing the same goods at a lower price, and thereby the monopoly is broken. It is not my intention here to go into a detailed analysis of economic forces. I am simply trying to point out how the relativity of the death consciousness can be used to create two extremes that seem to be in direct opposition to each other. In reality, both of the two extremes serve to further the cause of the serpents who are trying to manipulate and control the people. Obviously, this has many ramifications. However, in this context, I want to make sure that you understand the need to avoid being pulled into this age-old battle between two extremes. Do not allow yourself to be drawn into fighting the war between the Gog and the Magog, the false gods of this world, neither of which represent the true God in heaven. Avoid the relative extremes. To discover the truth of God, you must avoid being pulled into the extremes of this world. You must avoid being drawn into black and white thinking. When you think in terms of black and white, relative good and evil, you tend to develop a simplistic view of reality. It is so easy to think that a particular group of people is the enemy and that you can solve all problems by eliminating that enemy. This black and white thinking can so easily pull you into extremism and fanaticism, and these states of mind can never lead you to discover the truth of God. The truth of God is not relative. It is not black and white. This does not mean that the truth of God is gray, because gray is simply a muddled mixture of black and white. The truth of God is above and beyond all the colorings and the divisions that spring from the relativity of the death consciousness. The truth of God is what my beloved brother of light, Gautama Buddha, called the middle way. The Buddha was the first to bring the teaching of the middle way to this planet. If you feel the need to understand this concept, I recommend that you study his teachings. However, you will find elements of these teachings in my own words, because I too studied Buddhism and I followed and practiced the middle way. If you study my sayings, you will notice that many of them are the type of sayings that in Zen Buddhism are referred to as koans. Koans are sayings that are designed to shock and surprise people out of their normal state of consciousness and make them look at life from a new angle. Many of my sayings are designed to shock you out of the relativity of the death consciousness and to help you look beyond that relativity and reach for a higher understanding. These sayings are meant to open the way for an intuitive insight from the Christ mind that cuts through the density of the death consciousness like a bolt of lightning. As one example, think about the situation of the woman caught in adultery. An angry mob was ready to stone this woman, yet I was able to pacify them by making one simple statement. Let him who is without sin amongst you cast the first stone. Allow your intuition, allow your Christ self, and allow me to give you these flashes of insight that will suddenly transform your consciousness and help you see that which you could never see through the relativity of the death consciousness. Listen for answers. Let me give you the essential key to developing intuition. Intuition is a form of communication through which your higher mind and your spiritual teachers attempt to communicate with your conscious mind and give you an insight that will help you rise to the next step on your personal path. The key to receiving this insight is to avoid thinking, analyzing, or judging with the outer mind. To avoid this form of thinking, you must strive for balance and avoid having your mind polarized towards any of the relative extremes. The key to improving your intuition is to simply listen. You must develop a state of mind in which you are constantly directing attention towards your Christ self and listening for the word of truth. You must develop a state of mind that I call listening grace. The key to developing this state of mind is to listen with an open mind, a mind that is free from prejudice and judgment. I earlier said that the death consciousness creates an idol of reality and then seeks to force reality to conform to its preconceived image. To truly listen, you must look beyond the idols created by the death consciousness. That is why I said, unless you become as little children, you cannot enter the kingdom of God. The true meaning is that unless you develop the open and trusting mind of a child, the mind that is free from prejudice and judgment, you will not be able to hear the truth of God that is spoken to you only in the stillness of your heart. Dare to look beyond the many relative idols found in this world. Dare to listen for the truth of God that is beyond all relativity. In Him, in the mind of God, is no variance or turning. In Him is only the living truth, the living Word. Clearing your mind of false ideas. I have already told you that for the past 2,000 years, numerous things have been taken away from and added to my true teachings. I must admit that I am continually amazed at people's ability to construct and actually believe the most incredible theories and ideas. I can tell you that there are so many false ideas about me, about Christianity, about God, about religion, and about spirituality floating around on this planet that I can understand those who refuse to deal with any kind of spiritual topics. I can also understand those who cling to the religion in which they were brought up and refuse to consider new ideas. However, I have already told you that this is part of the plan of the serpents in your midst. These serpents know that they cannot block the tide forever. It is inevitable that more and more people will begin to open their minds to new ideas in the field of spirituality and religion. Therefore, the serpents are attempting to throw out so many confusing and outrageous ideas that people will either be misled, confused, or overwhelmed. Do not concern yourself with the many false ideas that are out there. Focus on developing your intuition, and I can promise you that through that intuition, you will achieve the discernment that will allow you to know what is of God and what is not of God. However, you can greatly enhance this process by making a conscious effort to purge your mind of the false ideas that have already entered your consciousness. I must tell you that most people on this planet have been exposed to such false beliefs. Therefore, it is safe to assume that you could benefit from doing a bit of spiritual house cleaning. To achieve maximum spiritual growth, you must be willing to let go of false ideas. You must be willing to realize the falsity of such ideas, even if it causes you to have to change beliefs with which you have grown comfortable. When I said, I come not to bring peace, but a sword, I was referring to this very process. It is a fact that human beings tend to be creatures of habit. Therefore, they are often reluctant to reconsider or to let go of ideas with which they have become familiar. A perfect example of this is my beloved Paul. He was brought up in the Orthodox Jewish religion, and he believes some of the false ideas promoted by that religion. Because of his acceptance of these false ideas, he had reasoned that Jesus Christ and his followers were not of the true faith. He was very attached to these ideas, and he was very reluctant to change his ways and reconsider his core beliefs. To turn Paul around, I had to make use of the drastic measure of appearing to him in a vision so powerful that Paul, given the fact that he was prepared at inner levels, could not deny it or explain it away. It is my sincere hope that you will be far more open than Paul. I hope you will be willing to reconsider some of your most dearly held beliefs and to be God-taught. I am not thereby saying that you have to abandon all of your current beliefs or that you have to abandon your false beliefs all at once. I do not desire to throw you into an identity crisis. However, I do desire to see you engage in a process whereby you gradually reevaluate your current beliefs and use your inner discernment to determine whether you need to expand, change, or even abandon some of those beliefs. I am not telling you to follow any outer source in this matter, not even this book. I am telling you to follow the inner source of your own intuition and the insights you receive from your Christ self. Study to show thyself approved unto God. What can you do to speed up the process whereby you learn to see through and let go of false or incomplete beliefs? Simply engage in a process of studying spiritual teachings. Obviously, I would like you to start with this book and some of the other books and websites we have brought forth through this messenger. Do not simply read this book one time and think you are done with it. To fully absorb the teachings I am giving in this book, you need to read it several times and to carefully digest it. Then use the understanding I have given you in this book to gain a new perspective on other spiritual teachings. I think that if you would truly absorb my teachings in this book and then read the New Testament, you would gain much new inspiration from the scriptures. There are also many other Christian texts that can serve as inspiration. Study some of the Christian mystics, especially some of the Gnostics, such as Origen of Alexandria, who was truly one of my own. Study some of the texts that have been discovered within this century, such as the Nag Hammadi Library, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and many other apocryphal texts that are not part of the official Bible. I especially recommend the Gospel of Thomas, which contains many of my direct sayings. Many people will want to stay within the context of Christianity itself, and this is acceptable as long as you follow your inner direction. However, I also know that many people are prepared to look at spiritual teachings from other sources. There are many spiritual teachings on this planet that can serve as a great inspiration for you. The texts of the major world religions can be a great help. So can many texts that have been brought forth even in this century. I have told you that I am part of a team of spiritual teachers who have been working with humankind for a very long time. Throughout the ages, we of the Ascended Masters have attempted to bring forth a progressive revelation of the spiritual mysteries. We have done this through many different people who were willing to raise their consciousness and serve as the open door for the bringing forth of a particular spiritual teaching. In the last century, this process has been greatly accelerated, and the reason is that we are now at the end of one age and the beginning of the next. The past 2,000-year period has been what many people call the Age of Pisces. I was the spiritual hierarch for that age. Planet Earth is now entering the next 2,000-year cycle, namely the Age of Aquarius. Because of this change, there is a great opportunity for spiritual growth. In the last century, millions of people have opened their minds to new spiritual ideas. God has responded to this openness in many different ways. There are many, many sources of spiritual teachings that are truly sponsored by the Ascended Masters. There are also many false teachings produced by the serpents in an attempt to confuse and confound. If you will work on developing intuition, you will have the discernment to know the difference. I am aware that some Orthodox Christians look upon any new movement or teaching as a New Age cult. Because you are reading this book, I am sure you will not be unduly concerned by these labels. The fact is that if I walked the earth today and did the things I did 2,000 years ago, these very same Orthodox Christians would label me, Jesus Christ, as a very dangerous New Age cult leader. Therefore, let not the judgments of other people prevent you from discovering and reading the spiritual teachings that we of the Ascended Masters have given to you. I'm not thereby saying that you should study all of the teachings available. I am not saying that you should join any particular organization. Simply let your intuition guide you and show you what to study.